Greetings, ladies and gents, and welcome to this latest edition of Vintage Sci-Fi, where I take old-timey-wimey stories and read them to you. Some of these stories are going to be 100 years old, or more in some cases. Now, if you like this sort of content, I would humbly ask that you hit the like button and possibly even the subscribe button. But more importantly, you're here for something specific, and I'm here to deal that drug that you're looking for. Let's get on to some vintage sci-fi called Hunting Criminals in 2000 AD. Written by Leo Felix Zuckerowitz in the mighty year of 1923. The acting officer of the burglary division sat in his office and followed warily the minute hand on the electric master clock, which gradually approached the midnight hour. The collar of his uniform was opened, and he was turning over the leaves of a detective story. It was manifestly superfluous for him to take the functions of his office too seriously, for in the last 50 years the prevention and guardian divisions of the police had been perfected to such a fine degree that only an idiot or a genius in the burglary line would think of breaking into a house. In his office, the threads of a widely branched, very phenomenal detection system came together, which had cost many thousands of marks, but also had absolutely stopped the burglars and robbers who had come into the field after the World War, now a matter of ancient history. The criminal statistics were reduced to isolated incidents, and a practically ideal degree of safety ruled over the whole land. Just now the clock, with its light beat, had announced the midnight hour, when suddenly, on the white marble switchboard covered with its innumerable incandescent lamps, a light appeared, coming from a tiny little reddish lamp, and at the same time, shrill and persistent through the silent room, came the sound of an alarm clock. Hasty steps were heard in the corridor, and the next instant the police automobile was heard puffing and ready to go out of the street, while in the doorway the chauffeur stood ready to receive instructions from his superior. Lieutenant Brillov jumped up from his writing table and read the number which glaring white letters stood out from the signal lamp. 12752A, the Great Bank of Commerce. He threw over a black switch, and at once innumerable hidden microphones on all the floors and all the rooms of the threatened bank were brought into circuit, which announced to the operators in the police department the slightest word and the least sound within the threatened building. Keys rattled, muffled steps were heard falling on thick carpets. Now came a man's rough voice. "The police are having their blessed sleep, Timor. Wasn't it a fine thought of me to get you over on my side, you, the trusted guardian of the bank? But your hound-like loyalty gave me a bad job before I could get you, so as to come over onto my side and to throw the alarm system out of circuit." Lieutenant Brillov gave a low, joyful whistle through his teeth, and the waiting chauffeur, to whom the loudspeaker had clearly transmitted every word as if spoken in the very room, smiled. "We know one of them anyhow," said Brillov. "That is, the watchman HenryTheRed reported as to us absolutely faithful and reliable. But the good man never suspected that the cutting out of the alarm system at night would put this other system into circuit. So Sherman let her go. You know what to do. You won't have much work. It is only a bagatelle." A short military turn, the automobile started in action, its shrill whistle sounding loud the next instant, while Brillov stepped to the telephone to notify the bank directors of the occurrence. Then he switched to the secret microphone in again and watched the sequence of events with halted breath. The feverish hissing of an oxygen cylinder was heard on the loudspeaker, and then a slight noise, as if a piece of iron had fallen on the ground. A coarse laughing. "That didn't take long, Timor. Now quick, pack up the goods." And then a snarling curse. A voice of thunder came out of the apparatus. "Hold your hands up in the name of the law." A deafening sound. 2 shots, one after the other, muffled fall. Brillov laughed. "The mouse is in the trap. That was the falling of the door of the cage." But now he listened in astonishment. Over the wires came the sound of steps. Shots came next. Could the robber have escaped with a sudden dash? Brillo pressed upon the white button. He closed all the doors of the building by electric telemechanics. There was no escape. Brillo again listened. The policeman he knew that the central office could understand every word he said cried out loudly against the walls. When we entered the steel chamber, the burglar threw a smoke bomb. In the impenetrable smoke, he managed to get by us and got out before the cage door fell. The officer in front of the steel cage took up a pursuit at once, but scarcely had the burglar reached the rear door when the door of the cage fell in front of us. Lieutenant Brillo pulled the white knob back, which opened the door and the cage again, and bit his lips in irritation. He himself had rescued the robber from the pursuers. Then he connected the wireless telephone to the police telephone post, which stood in the side street next to the bank. The officer felt suddenly a weak electric tickling at his temples and jerked the little telephone to his ear. "Officer number 381 on night watch." "Listen," said Brillo. "The Bank of Commerce is broken into. The burglar has escaped out of the rear door. He must pass your station. Catch him. Whatever happens, and if necessary, shoot." The policeman repeated the order to himself, and then looked out peeringly through the darkness. No pedestrian was to be seen. Only an automobile approached him at high speed. The officer drew his revolver and gave a warning shot. In response, the automobile doubled speed. The officer sprang to one side and pulled out a handle which, by electric action, drew a steep barricade across the street crossing. The burglar was not going to escape him, whatever happened. But what was that? Two great springs appeared suddenly on the bottom of the automobile, which lifted it up, and it jumped as if it was a running horse over the barricade. Before the officer could recover from his astonishment and gave a shot, the automobile had disappeared in the darkness of night. Lieutenant Brillo cursed wildly as he learned of this. He at once alarmed by wireless all the police posts of the city, but the replies gave no comfort. The automobile was nowhere to be seen. He turned loose all the police automobiles. The whole region was covered at reckless speed. In vain. Only one thing remained, the airplane police station, a giant captive balloon to which ready for instant flight. 2 monoplanes were attached. The answer came from them that a thick cloud prevented all outlook and airplane patrols would be useless. Brillo began to rage. He knew if the burglar escaped that he would be removed from his position by the severe regulations of the department. Then, suddenly, the air police station 11Z rang him up. Their wave indicator warned them of the presence of an airplane not regularly licensed. Brillo connected his own apparatus, and his indicator marked on the card beneath it a beautiful undulating line that led to the north. Telegraph and wireless telephones worked feverishly, but in all directions dense clouds were announced that made the pursuit impossible. The fugitives by this time were in the neighborhood of Hamburg, and finally the news came that the fleet of police airplanes were on their heels. Now the sea lay bright and wide in the first rays of the morning sun aboard the fleeing burglar. As he suddenly descended in an abrupt volplane to earth, jumped out of his fuselage, and hurried towards the shore, automobiles began to appear out of the distance. Out of the air, shots began to pour down on him. He ran with desperate speed. He reached the bank. Behind the piling there was a boat. Hands were stretched out to him from it. He jumped on board and sunk powerless to the bottom, when the boat, with the speed of an arrow, sank to the bottom. And now, half fainting, he proudly laughed. The burglars themselves, it seemed, were all well organized, and the millions of plunder in 100,000-mark notes were stowed away in his knapsack, resting lightly on his shoulders. A police automobile appeared on the scene. The young lieutenant put a glass to his eyes and looked closely over the surface of the water. Nothing. He gave an alarm to the submarine police by wireless. The apparatus was built skillfully into the auto. In a few minutes, with a delicate sound measuring apparatus, the fleeing submarine was located. A short and easy task for the great Alpha electric magnetic traction apparatus. It shot gigantic lines of force through the water, and slowly, with irresistible titanic power, it drew the little boat that vainly tried to escape into the safer harbor of the submarine police station. The clock ran out 5 o'clock, as the wireless announced the capture of the fugitives to the anxiously waiting Lieutenant Belov. No one was as happy as the lieutenant, for now a weight was lifted off his heart, and he needed to have no more anxiety for his future. End of story.